Hey, Walter and Steven. I hope you guys are having a great week. This week we are continuing on in the Jesus series with actually turning from some of the events of Jesus to actually Jesus' teaching. So this week will be a little bit more abstract. You're going to have to use some more personal examples, I think, in order to get the main point across. But here's the big point, the big idea. And that is that God has blessed us. So how can we respond with a deeper trust in God as our provider? We're going to be looking at the Beatitudes in Matthew 5. But before we get there, just a quick note about this upcoming Wednesday. This upcoming Wednesday, April 21st, we are having our Color War. And this is our final invite night of the year. What an invite night is it's an opportunity to invite people to come in an easy way. We change things up a little bit. It's a little bit more geared towards fun. We have this idea that, man, we're going to be inviting our friends to come. We're going to share the gospel. But we're going to spend a lot of time doing something that's fun, something that brings us together. Over the course of this year, we've done things like the Battle of the Grades, where we were outside playing all those crazy games. We've done a Christmas party where we had it snow and had an ugly sweater contest. We've had a bonfire where we made s'mores. And so this final one is a color war. We will have 250 pounds of colored powder, separated, and we're going to play a couple of different games, but basically we're going to be able to throw this bright color at each other, and it's just going to be a ton of fun. And so here's why this is so important, is that you guys are going to be the main catalyst to help bring up excitement within the guys and encourage them to invite their friends to come. We think this is ultimately one of the best ways to help disciple our young people, is to get them excited for the things that we're doing, and then in turn help them begin to become comfortable with reaching out and talking to their friends and inviting them to come join them. Because that's what the disciples did. They began telling people about Jesus, and after Jesus went back up to heaven, they started telling people about Jesus and saying, hey, come join us. Come join this thing called the church. And that's how it grew. So that's what we want our young people to do. That's this upcoming Wednesday, April 21st. I'd love for you guys, I know sometimes you're able to make it on Wednesday, sometimes not. If you can only make it one Wednesday, this would be the Wednesday to do it, April 21st. So love to have you guys. Just bring it up in your group. So the lesson, you're going to be looking at the Beatitudes in Matthew 5. Over the next 2 weeks, it's going to be all in the Beatitudes. This week, you're going to be focusing mainly in on verses 3 through 6. And you can set the scene, the idea that Jesus has gone up on this mountain, and he's got, if you can see it, he's got potentially thousands of people around him. And yet he goes up a little bit higher and he has his disciples and right next to him. And the reason he did this is because he's actually teaching his disciples. The crowd is hearing him, but he's really pouring into the disciples. And the reason for that is this, because his disciples are curious and they're a little bit more invested in wanting to follow him and really wanting to know, hey, who is this Jesus? What is he about? He's called us, he's asked us to follow him. So what are the things that we're going to be doing to follow him? And the crowd is just like, man, this guy is incredible. He's a miracle worker. We think he might be the God man. He's saying things that we haven't heard before. So they're curious, but they're not invested. The disciples, on the other hand, they're curious and invested. And maybe that's a great way to maybe set up is, where are our young people? Are they curious but not invested, or are they curious and invested about who Jesus is? So to open up the lesson, that's just kind of the background for you personally as you're thinking about this lesson. The big thing that we're trying to get across is to help people see God has blessed us. It might look different, but God has blessed us. And how can we have a deeper trust in God? So to open up the lesson, after you kind of, hey, how was your week? Color War's coming, who you inviting? That kind of thing. I would open it up with this. The lesson encourages you to take pennies or jelly beans or something like that. I'll tell you right now, I have a bag of candy with individually wrapped packets of Skittles. I will bring those in for you guys because we don't need to eat them in my household. And but you can pass those out and tell them that each Skittle represents $25 or $10 or make up the amount that you want. But that way everyone gets the same amount roughly. And then give them 3 minutes to decide how would they spend it. So they can visually see, okay, I'm gonna spend $10 on this, or this thing's gonna cost, I'm gonna buy a pair of Jordans, it's gonna cost me $200. And give them 3 minutes to decide how they'd spend their money in about 24 hours. Then afterwards, ask them the 3 questions that are in the lesson. What did you spend the majority of your money on? What person benefited the most from how you spent your money? And then finally, do you think God is pleased in how you spent your money? And so kind of rapid fire, ask those questions, see what the guys say. But ultimately, this is the big idea behind the opener. We have a tendency to be very selfish. We have a tendency to be focused on ourselves. If we have money, we're going to spend it on ourselves. And so rather than spending everything on ourselves, what we're going to see is that God is encouraging us to think outside of ourselves. And Jesus is going to flip the entire world on its head in his teaching on the Beatitudes. And this is where you jump into Matthew 5, 1 through 6. You're really going to be looking at verses 3 through 6 with three big ideas. You're going to be looking at money and wealth. You're going to be looking at mourning and sadness and God's comfort in that. And then finally, you're going to be looking at the idea of hunger. And in each one of these, I think it'd be really good to point out what the world thinks. So first point, wealth means more than just money. What does the world think about money? The world thinks that the wealthy are the ones who get to do what they want to do. If you're poor, then you're stuck. If you're poor, you can't go on vacation. If you're poor, you can't buy nice things. If you're poor, you won't get ahead in life. But if you're wealthy, your money will give you what you need, right? Some people would say that about politicians and businessmen and, this current thing like, hey, if you're wealthy, then your kids will be wealthy. And if you're poor, then your kids will be poor. So we think it's all about money. And yet, Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit. They're blessed. What does that mean? The lesson asks some really, really good questions, but read through those, decide which ones you want to bring out. But here's what you're trying to help the students see. The world says your wealth will give you a future. Jesus says, if you're poor in spirit, in other words, if you're willing to bankrupt yourself, if you're willing to be poor in your selfishness, you can be rich in the kingdom of heaven. If you're poor in the amount that you think about yourself, in your selfishness, in your self-centeredness, and in the idea that life is all about you, if you're poor in that, you're willing to make life about other people, you're willing to make life about Jesus, you will inherit the kingdom of heaven. You will be kings in heaven, right? Number two, it says that God understands when you mourn. The world says that when you mourn about something, when you're sad about something, it becomes the number one priority and everything else is eliminated. You can't do anything, you're paralyzed, your sadness keeps you from being effective at anything else. And yet it says, blessed are they who mourn because they can be comforted. There's strength in our mourning because as we mourn, we can receive comfort from a God who loves us and is for us and can restore us back to the peace that we so long for and desire. This would be a great opportunity for you to share from your own life. Man, how has God comforted you when you were mourning about something? And help the guys think, man, how can God maybe comfort me? Or how can other people begin comforting me? Then finally, the last big idea is that hunger for God is his way of living. The world says that if you're hungry and you're not satisfied, then you're not going to get very far. In fact, if you're hungry, you should do whatever it takes to fill your hunger. And here, Jesus says it's not about being hungry for food. It's not about being hungry for success and wealth and chasing after those things. It's about being hungry for God. And this is something that I think if you were to ask the guys, hey, would you say that you are hungry for the things of God? This is where it moves beyond just curious. This is where, man, I want what God has for me. I want the things of God. I want God himself. I don't want anything else. I just want God. This is one of the reasons why people fast. You can bring that up in that sometimes the reason that people will abstain from food, they might go crazy, but they'll abstain from food, they'll abstain from sex, they'll abstain from nice things, comforting things. They'll do that so that as they feel that physical hunger, they in turn ask God, give them a spiritual hunger for him. And in that, only God can satisfy them. Here it says that God is going to satisfy those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. They will be filled. God will give them what they need. And so, once again, each one of these, the way that this lesson is meant to be done is that you read the passage and ask some of the questions. Let the guys kind of talk through this, and you're just there to facilitate and guide them to the end and big idea. There's an additional discussion if you feel like, hey, we need to go a little bit deeper with this. I would suggest 1 Timothy 6, 3 through 10 has some really good things to say about money and true wealth and priorities. And also 2 Corinthians 1, 3 through 7 talks about God's involvement as we're mourning. If you feel like, hey, we need to go a little bit deeper, I don't know if they get this, you can go there. But for the application, a couple of questions. The first question they ask is, what are the specific ways you can help comfort another person who's mourning a loss? This is a really, really important question. How can we be used by God to help comfort other people? As Christians, we are supposed to be doing that. Every single one of the guys in your group has things that they are maybe in a closet, but they are mourning and they're hurting on. So be careful with this. Guys have a tendency to want to blurt out, verbal jabs at one another, call one another names. But when we see someone who's legitimately hurting, how can we invest there? Second question, what can you do to make sure that you want God more than your possessions? Maybe there's something that you need to give up. Pastor Stephen said this past week that your heart will go for whatever it's fed. Are you giving yourself things that are going to cause your heart to want God? Or are you giving yourself things that's going to cause your heart to just want physical, selfish, fleshly things? And then lastly, what are the things that they need to do to trust God? It says, blessed are the poor in spirit. You have to bankrupt of yourself and trust God that He's going to take care of you. That's a hard thing to do. What are the areas that maybe we need to surrender and trust to God to help us in that? And so the very beginning of this is all about trusting God. That's the big idea. We want to trust God more. We want to see how God's blessed us. See how God has blessed us in a way that the world might not see as a blessing. But as a result, we trust God even more. I hope you have fun preparing for the lesson. This should be a fun lesson. You can tell them that they can eat the Skittles as you're teaching, as long as they participate well. But I hope you have fun. Have a great week, and I'll see you guys Sunday.